The price of a secret. He left her pregnant. Stop! Before we begin this heartbreaking and hopeful journey, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments, how would you react if a letter destroyed your life, only to find out 18 years later it was a lie? Watch as a genius daughter takes the stage and a powerful man finally discovers the truth, setting his life on a collision course he never imagined. Part 1. The cruel disappearance. The betrayal. Sarah Hayes was just 21. Living in a small room in downtown New York, she balanced her fashion design classes by day with night shifts at a vintage boutique to pay the rent. She dreamed of becoming a designer, someone whose name would one day be whispered on the runways. She wasn't rich, but she was ambitious, and above all, she was in love. Ethan Vance was everything Sarah was not. Older, self-assured, already successful. At 27, he had his own investment firm, a reputation for aggressive but smart deals, and a mentor in the finance world who introduced him at every party as the next prodigy. He had brown eyes that saw through markets and a charm that made him impossible to ignore. When he walked into the boutique where Sarah worked on a rainy Thursday night, their worlds collided. She wasn't supposed to be on shift. Someone had called in sick. He wasn't supposed to be shopping. He was just killing time before a late dinner with clients. They started talking. A week later, they were inseparable. He took her to jazz clubs in Greenwich Village, surprised her with late-night trips to Brooklyn for pizza, and listened to her talk about her designs as if she were already a legend. For the first time, Sarah felt like someone believed in her without needing proof. When she found out she was pregnant, she was terrified. But a small part of her held on to hope. Ethan had always said he wanted a family someday. Maybe not now, but someday. Maybe fate was just pushing that timeline forward. She didn't wait. She told him everything over breakfast in his luxury apartment, her voice trembling, her hands folded in her lap. He looked at her silently, then asked for time to think. The next day, he was gone. His phone number was disconnected. His assistant said he was traveling indefinitely. No more flowers, no more texts, no more answers. Sarah was devastated. She called again and again, until finally, someone at his firm told her point blank, he does not want contact. What she didn't know was that he had received a letter, a cold, typed letter, signed with her name, but not by her. In it, the author claimed the child wasn't his and that she had lied to trap him. The letter told him to leave now and not look back. The sender was his mother, Eleanor Vance, a woman of steel nerves who had built a dynasty of money and control and would not tolerate distractions, especially from poor fashion students. Ethan believed the letter, or perhaps he chose to believe it. He didn't call her, didn't ask questions. He walked away. Sarah was left alone. She thought about terminating the pregnancy. It would be easier. Her scholarship was already on a thread, and her parents had cut ties when she moved to the city without finishing her business degree. But when she heard the heartbeat during her first ultrasound, everything changed. She moved out of the room, sold her sewing machine, and found a closet-sized studio in a quiet town 3 hours north called Willow Creek. There was no fashion scene, no nightclubs, no familiar faces. She cried for weeks, counted change for groceries, and sewed other people's wedding dresses in her living room just to afford prenatal vitamins. But she refused to surrender. This child would be loved. This child would never feel abandoned. And as much as it hurt, she would never speak his name again. If you were Sarah, would you have believed Ethan's decision to abandon you so completely? What would you do after receiving such devastating news? Comment below with your thoughts. Part 2. The Silent Phenomenon. A Miracle in Winter. Maya was born on a bitter January night, when the snow outside covered the windows in thick, silent layers, and the hospital lights flickered once during a gust of wind that almost cut the power. Sarah arrived alone, hunched over with pain, her coat soaked and clinging to her. The nurse gently asked if the father was coming. Sarah just shook her head. She hadn't said his name in months. The labor was long, exhausting, and raw. There were no flowers, no emotional grandparents pacing the halls, no proud couple to cut the cord. But when they laid the tiny girl on Sarah's chest, everything else disappeared. She had fair hair already forming on her head, and when her eyes opened, they were dark, deep, and unmistakably brown. Not her color, not her family's. They were his. For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. She named her Maya without hesitation. It was a name she had always loved, strong and elegant. Maya Hayes, no hyphen, no second last name, no trace of a man who had chosen absence. The days that followed were a blur of noise and silence. Maya cried often and slept little. Sarah learned to function on 3 hours of broken sleep, feeding her between alarms and freelance sewing assignments. The apartment was too small, with a heater that only worked if she kicked it twice on the side and pleaded with it. Winter air seeped in beneath the windows, but she wrapped Maya in layers of second-hand blankets and held her tight through every storm. Sometimes, she would whisper stories to her of a beautiful future where they lived by the ocean and had ceiling-high bookshelves. She didn't know if those dreams would ever come true, but they kept her warm. By the time Maya was 1, she could hold eye contact longer than most toddlers. By 2, she was assembling puzzles faster than the daycare staff had ever seen. Sarah recorded every milestone in a worn leather notebook, alongside sketches of clothing designs she never had time to make. She worked all day, picked Maya up in the evening, and stayed up late finishing the bookkeeping for a local plumbing company, whose owner paid her under the table in cash. Money was scarce, always, sometimes unbearably. There were days Sarah went without eating so Maya wouldn't have to. She clipped coupons, bought secondhand, and learned to stretch one grocery bag for an entire week. But somehow, every time she saw Maya laughing or reading aloud from one of her storybooks, she felt that life was still offering her something sacred. Her daughter was happy, curious, fearless, and that was everything. A quiet phenomenon. The town of Willow Creek was small and sleepy, but the local library became their second home. The librarian, Mrs. Thompson, noticed early how quickly Maya devoured the storybooks and gently introduced her to older children's science books. Sarah used her breaks to research public school ratings and after-school enrichment programs. She couldn't afford private education, but she could build a path brick by brick. When Maya entered elementary school, her teachers called her gifted. She was quiet but observant, gentle but fiercely driven. She never asked about her father, not once. Sarah wondered if she was waiting, or if somehow she already understood. On every birthday, Sarah gave her a handmade gift, a fabric storybook, a dress she tailored from scratch, or a box filled with drawings of their memories. She had nothing expensive to offer, but she gave her everything that mattered. As the years passed, the apartment didn't get bigger, but their lives did. Maya became the girl other kids admired, not because she was popular, but because she wasn't afraid to be different. She joined the high school science club, began tutoring math in the 7th grade, and read medical journals for fun in the 8th. Sarah watched in quiet awe. She had built a life on broken dreams and duct tape, but somehow she had produced something golden. Her daughter was brilliant, and though the world hadn't been fair to her, Maya had turned it into something beautiful. By the time Maya was 17, she had become a quiet phenomenon in Willow Creek. She was the kind of student teachers talked about in the staff room, not just for her intelligence, but for the way she carried herself. She never sought attention, never boasted, never posted selfies or flaunted awards. Instead, she accumulated knowledge the way others accumulated followers, and behaved with a grace far beyond her years. Her days were spent moving between advanced classes, volunteer tutoring sessions, science fairs, and late-night study marathons in the same corner of the local library where she had learned to read. Despite the weight of expectation, Maya never seemed burdened. She organized her time with military precision. Her small room was covered in whiteboards, sticky notes, scholarship deadlines, and quotes she found inspiring. She lived in a world of equations, research papers, and quiet ambition. Yet for all her academic focus, there was a sweetness to her, a warmth inherited from her mother. She made time for the shy students, defended anyone who was bullied, and always thanked the janitors by name. It was her chemistry teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, who first noticed she was working on something far greater than a typical school project. In the back of the science lab, Maya had set up a mini workstation where she was developing a low-cost, biodegradable filtration system using natural enzymes. Her goal, she explained one afternoon while cleaning beakers, was to create something that could be used in underdeveloped areas with little access to clean water. It had started as a simple idea for a local competition, but the deeper she dove into the research, the more determined she became to make it real. Mr. Rodriguez, stunned by the depth of her research, submitted her project to a state-level innovation showcase without telling her. When she won first place, representatives from national science foundations took notice. One of them, a woman named Carla Perez, who worked with a network of philanthropic investors, introduced herself to Maya after the ceremony and asked if she had ever considered applying for the National Youth Innovation Summit in New York City. It was an annual, invitation-only event attended by university scouts, investors, and venture capitalists looking to back promising talent before they even entered college. Maya had never heard of it. She smiled politely and said, "Thank you." But the moment she got home, she spent hours researching. She knew the cost of the trip alone would be impossible for her mother to cover, but Sarah didn't hesitate. That same night, she took on another late-night bookkeeping client and applied for local travel grants. In 3 weeks, everything was arranged. The trip to New York was the first time Maya had ever left the state. She packed her few belongings in a second-hand suitcase and carried her project components in a box reinforced with duct tape. Sarah couldn't afford to go with her, so she hugged her tight at the bus station, her voice trembling as she whispered, "No matter what happens there, you know exactly who you are. That will always be enough." Part 3. The Fatal Glance. The stage. New York was a different world than anything Maya had ever seen. Tall glass buildings stretched into the clouds. The air was electric with ambition, and everywhere she looked there were people who seemed to radiate power and purpose. The summit was held in a lavish hotel ballroom filled with rows of booths, stage lights, cameras, and strangers in suits asking complex questions. For the first few hours, Maya felt invisible. Her station was in a quiet corner of the room, far from the main presentation area. The booths closer to the center were filled with students from private academies and international programs. Kids who spoke confidently about multi-million-dollar startups and had mentors with famous last names. She felt out of place with her second-hand shoes and thrift store blazer, but she reminded herself why she had come. When the judges arrived at her table, she spoke without notes. She explained the science, the scalability, the cost-effectiveness, and the potential for global impact. She didn't promote herself as a brand. She simply spoke the truth. By the end of her demonstration, one of the judges looked at her for a long moment and asked, "Where did you say you were from?" Throughout the day, more people came. Someone must have talked. A professor from MIT stopped by and left his card. A woman from a Boston institute asked if she would be willing to present at an international summit in the spring. A tech investor invited her to apply for a summer research fellowship. The murmur around her station grew, not because of a flashy brand, but because the work was real. Maya's project was different. It wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to matter. By late afternoon, taking a brief break near the refreshments table, she overheard a group of elegantly dressed guests discussing the future of female inventors and the importance of early investment in talent. She didn't know that one of those men, standing with his back to her, dressed in a dark gray suit and sipping a drink, was Ethan Vance, her father. He hadn't seen her yet, and she had never seen him. They were in the same room for the first time in 18 years, and neither of them had any idea what was about to happen. What role did Sarah's self-sacrifice play in Maya's success? If you were Maya and knew the man in front of you was your father, what would you do? Give this video a like and share your thoughts. Part 4. The Unburied Truth. Ethan Vance didn't typically attend youth innovation gatherings. His schedule was packed with corporate boardrooms, international negotiations, and high-stakes tech investments. But this particular event had caught his attention after one of his junior partners mentioned a growing list of unusually talented students presenting real-world solutions. Vance Tech Ventures had recently launched a philanthropic arm focused on early-stage education investments. And though Ethan rarely handled outreach himself, something about this trip to New York had compelled him to go in person. He told himself it was for strategic visibility, a few PR photos, maybe one or two promising names to watch. What he didn't expect was for the day to take the most abrupt turn of his life. The ballroom was crowded, buzzing with youthful energy, bright-eyed ambition, and the low murmur of networking. He shook hands, nodded through presentations, and politely declined interviews. He wasn't in the mood for small talk. Something in the room felt heavy. Perhaps it was fatigue, or perhaps it was the feeling he sometimes had in the quiet moments between meetings, that something was missing and had been for a long time. He was midway through a conversation with a senior university consultant when he noticed a small gathering forming in one of the back corners of the exhibit hall. He could have ignored it. He usually did. But a familiar quality in the voices drew his attention. Not familiar because he recognized them, but because of their tone. It was quiet, precise, purposeful. Someone was explaining a scientific mechanism in a way even a non-scientist could understand. His eyes drifted over, and that's when he saw her. The girl was standing next to a handmade display. Nothing flashy. Just carefully organized research, diagrams, and a table featuring a series of small filtration models. She was explaining something to a listening panel, and there was a subtle confidence in her posture, the kind that wasn't rehearsed or coached. Ethan didn't know why, but his heart gave a strange, discordant tug. She had long, fair hair pulled back in a loose braid, and as she turned slightly to adjust her equipment, he saw her face clearly. For a moment, everything in him froze. Her eyes, deep and unmistakably brown, looked up as she spoke to one of the judges, and Ethan felt something old and buried rush to the surface. He moved forward, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There was no doubt. Her features were hauntingly familiar. She didn't look like him in structure, but the eyes, the focus, the quiet intensity, the slight tilt of her head when she paused to think. He knew those patterns. He had seen them before, 18 years ago, in a hospital room he never visited, in a goodbye he never realized he had made. She looked like Sarah. He moved through the crowd, drawn by something he didn't understand. When he reached the edge of the group around her booth, he saw her name on the screen. Maya Hayes. Not Vance. Just Hayes. He stumbled back slightly, almost as if he had been struck. He hadn't heard that name in almost 2 decades. He had forced himself not to. Sarah Hayes, the girl he once loved, the one he had thought about countless times in silence, the one he had left behind after a letter arrived. Cold, devastating. Final, a letter that told him the child wasn't his, that she had lied, that she wanted nothing from him. But now, standing in front of this 18-year-old girl, Ethan realized something he had refused to believe for years. That letter had been a lie. He didn't need a DNA test. He didn't need confirmation. He was looking into the eyes of his daughter. Panic washed over him, colliding with guilt, shock, and something even heavier: grief. He had lost everything. The first steps, the first words, the first day of school. Her entire life had passed without him. And now, here she was, standing in front of him, brilliant and serene. And she didn't even know he existed. As the crowd began to disperse, she moved toward the refreshment table, walking past him without even a glance. Why would she look? He was a stranger. And then he saw her. Sarah. She was standing across the room, half hidden behind one of the grand flags, watching Maya like a proud sentinel. Her hair was shorter now, tucked behind one ear, and her posture was straighter. But it was her, the same Sarah he had fallen in love with, except her eyes now held a depth and a weariness he had never seen before. Their eyes met. It lasted only a second. But in that second, time collapsed. All the years he had pushed her out of his mind, all the pain he thought he had buried, all the choices he had defended, it all rushed back with a force that nearly knocked the air from his lungs. She said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't scream or run. She simply looked at him, as if daring him to move, daring him to speak. Her expression wasn't hate. No, but it was something aged, wary, and tired. He took a step toward her, but she moved away. Not dramatically, not in anger, just with the quiet resolve of someone who had spent too long waiting for something that never came. Ethan stood there, surrounded by success, by money, by everything he had always believed he wanted. And all he could think was that he had lost the two people who could have given him meaning. His daughter was here, alive, extraordinary, and he was a ghost in her world. For the first time in 18 years, Ethan Vance felt the full weight of what he had run away from. And for the first time, he didn't know if he had the right to walk back in. What do you think made Ethan believe his mother's letter without question? If you were Sarah, how would you have reacted to seeing Ethan at the summit? Tell us your opinion in the comments. Part 5. The Confession and the Crack. Ethan left the gala that night in a state of numb disbelief. He didn't stay for the keynotes or the closing reception. He spoke to no one on the way out, ignoring the investors and journalists who tried to shake his hand or pass him cards. He barely remembered walking through the hotel atrium or getting into the black car waiting outside. He spent the night in his luxury penthouse, sleepless, not working, just sitting in silence with a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. Thoughts came in waves, images of Sarah from years ago, the sound of her laughter, the day she had told him she was pregnant. Then the letter, the paper he still remembered holding in his hand like a death sentence, every word designed to kill the future he hadn't even realized he wanted. At the time, it had seemed rational to leave, logical. He had just started making a name for himself. He didn't believe he was ready for a child, let alone a scandal. But now, 18 years later, he understood that logic had been a mask. Fear had made the decision, and someone else's lies had sealed it. The next morning, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He returned to the source of the pain. He opened the locked drawer of his office where he kept old documents, files he never touched, pieces of the life he had buried. The letter was still there, folded and yellowed by time. He read it again. The tone, the phrasing. It didn't sound like Sarah. It was cold, unemotional, without nuance. Something was wrong. At the bottom, the signature was typed, not handwritten. His stomach churned. He called his former assistant, a woman named Angelica, who had worked closely with his mother during that time. When she answered, he didn't waste time on formalities. "Angelica," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Did my mother write Sarah's letter all those years ago?" There was a long pause on the other end, then a sigh. "I waited 18 years for you to ask me that." The truth poured out. Eleanor Vance, elegant, calculating, had intercepted the real letter Sarah had written, one full of fear, hope, and honesty, and had replaced it with a forged message intended to cut all ties. She had seen the relationship as a threat to Ethan's future, an inconvenience he couldn't afford. Angelica had known, but stayed silent for fear of retaliation. Now, after nearly 2 decades, the truth finally surfaced. Ethan hung up and felt his knees weaken. It was too late to undo the years, too late to go back for first steps or birthdays or lullabies. But maybe not too late to try. Not to fix it, because some things couldn't be fixed, but to show her, to show them both, that he hadn't walked away knowingly, that he had been wrong, but not uncaring. He tried to contact Sarah, but she didn't answer. Emails went unreplied. Calls never returned. It wasn't anger. He could feel it. It was protection. She wasn't protecting herself from him anymore. She was protecting Maya, and he couldn't blame her. So he started from the outside. He anonymously funded the rest of Maya's scholarship through a silent donor agreement. He contacted the summit organizers and requested her project appear in their global bulletin. Through an old professor at MIT, he secured her an invitation to a high school graduate research program. Every move he made was strategic, but invisible, with no signature, no announcement. He didn't want to buy his way back into their lives. He just wanted to ensure the doors she deserved were open. By night, he researched her work obsessively. He read every line of her published papers, studied her thought process, and found himself stunned by her vision. Maya wasn't just smart. She was revolutionary. She thought like an engineer, spoke like a humanitarian, and carried herself like someone who had never been told she couldn't do something. It was Sarah's doing. All of it. She had created this child without help, without support, without a safety net. And yet, Maya had become someone the world was now scrambling to invest in. The hardest part was staying away. He wanted to call her, introduce himself, explain everything. But how could he? What would he say? "I'm your father. I disappeared because someone lied to me and I didn't bother to check the truth. It wasn't enough. Excuses were easy. 18 years of silence were not." So he waited. He continued to help where he could, always anonymously, always carefully. He arranged for her to meet with mentors. He scheduled lunches with women in science and technology who could inspire her, and even pushed for her work to be featured for a global science awards committee for youth. Every time he heard her name mentioned in an article or a podcast, he felt a sharp pang of pride and pain. Weeks passed before Sarah finally responded. It was a single line in an email. "I know it was your money. I know that you know. Do not contact her." He stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't cruel. It was clear. It was a boundary. And yet, that same week, Maya sent him a LinkedIn request. He didn't know how she found him, or what she knew, or if the request was accidental. But it was there, staring back at him. He hit accept. His hands were shaking. It was the smallest door. A crack. But to Ethan, it felt like air after drowning. For the first time since that night in New York, he allowed himself to hope. Maybe the path forward wasn't closed. Maybe redemption didn't start with grand gestures, but with presence, patience, and truth. Do you think Sarah should have told Maya about her father sooner? What does Maya's decision to contact Ethan show about her character? Comment with your opinions. Part 6. The Inevitable Meeting. Maya expected nothing unusual when she sent the connection request. It was a quiet, impulsive act, driven more by curiosity than intent. She had seen his name mentioned in an article about anonymous donors supporting youth innovation. And, though she didn't know exactly how she knew it, something about the way the article described the man's involvement felt personal. She recalled seeing him in passing at the summit weeks earlier, a man in a dark gray suit with tired eyes, watching her booth from across the room as if he had seen a ghost. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. But now, after a strange comment from one of the judges and the sudden boost her project had gained in circles far beyond her reach, she began to connect the dots. The feeling that someone was watching out for her was no longer just intuition. It was real, and she had a gut feeling it was him. When he accepted the request, she didn't message him immediately. She stared at his profile, scrolling through the impressive portfolio, the university credentials, the list of companies he had built from scratch. There was no mention of family, no photos, no personal details. The man was all business, but the silence in his biography felt louder now. She kept her discovery to herself for a few days. Her mother had been more strained than usual lately. She came home from work quiet and distracted. She lingered longer than necessary looking at old photos, folding laundry as if she wasn't really in the room. Maya didn't ask questions. She knew when her mother was carrying something heavy. It had always been just the two of them, and Sarah had never lied to her. But this was different. This was the first time Maya felt something was being withheld. The moment came unexpectedly. It was a Saturday night. Rain lashed against the windows, and Maya was in the kitchen finishing a scholarship application, while Sarah was at the sink hand-washing dishes. Without looking up, Maya said in a low voice, "I think I know who my father is." Sarah's hand stopped in the water. She didn't move for 5 full seconds. Then, slowly, she turned off the faucet and dried her hands with a towel, her back still to her daughter. "Say that again," she whispered. Maya closed her laptop. "I saw him at the summit. I didn't know it then. But I think he's the one who's been helping me. The anonymous funding, the research connections. It all started after New York. I recognized his name in a donor article, and then I found him online. His name is Ethan Vance, isn't it?" Sarah turned around, her face pale but steady. Her eyes searched Maya's, and then something in her seemed to deflate. "Yes," she said. The word fell into the room like a broken plate, fragile, final, impossible to ignore. Maya didn't speak for a moment. She had prepared 1,000 versions of this conversation in her head, but none of them felt right now. Finally, she asked the only question that mattered. "Did he know about me?" Sarah sat down across from her and let out a slow, shaky breath. "No, not really. Not at the time." And so she told her everything. The truth, the love story, the sudden silence, the forged letter, the betrayal not just of a couple, but of a future. She told Maya about the night she lost the light alone, about the years of working double shifts, about the choice to never poison her daughter's life with resentment. She hadn't known the full truth until recently, but she had suspected for a long time that something didn't add up. And when she saw him at the summit, everything inside her confirmed it. The man she once loved had been lied to, but he had also allowed himself to disappear without fighting. Maya listened without interrupting. Her face remained still, but her heart hammered in her chest like an alarm bell. All this time, she had lived without a father, Not because he was dead or unknown, but because he had been tricked, because he had believed a lie, because he hadn't investigated. The hurt wasn't sharp. It was slow and deep, like something being pulled out of her chest thread by thread. "So he knows now," she finally said, "that I'm his daughter?" Sarah nodded. "Yes. He found out after the summit. He's the one who funded your program. He's been trying to contact me. I wouldn't let him talk to you. I didn't know if it would help or simply hurt more." Maya stood up and walked toward the window. She didn't cry, didn't yell. She simply stood there, arms crossed, watching the rain streak the glass in long, shaky lines. "Why didn't he try harder back then?" she asked. "Why didn't he question it? You were pregnant with his child. Why wasn't that enough?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "I ask myself that every day, but I think the answer is simple. He was afraid, and perhaps too proud, and he let someone else decide his life for him." Maya didn't reply. That night, she didn't sleep much. She reread everything she could find about Ethan Vance, his early career, his rise in the tech world, his reputation for calculated decisions and emotional distance. She tried to picture him as a scared, ambitious young man, and she tried to picture him now, trying to make amends without knowing how. The next day, she sent him a text. It was short, cautious, and direct. "I know who you are. I know what happened. I don't know yet what I want from you, but I think we should talk." She stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve held firm. Somewhere deep inside her, something old was stirring. It wasn't hope exactly, but the possibility of it. And that was enough to begin. In Maya's shoes, would you forgive your mother for keeping the truth from you? What do you feel about Ethan's attitude after knowing the truth? Comment with your opinions. Part 7. The Redemption Journey. A meeting in the park. Ethan read the text message 5 times before he allowed himself to believe it was real. He was sitting in his office, surrounded by glass walls and the quiet hum of a world that no longer interested him as it once had. His phone vibrated with market alerts and assistant calls and meetings he was already late for. But none of it mattered, not in this moment. The message had come from Maya, not Sarah, not a lawyer, not a distant cousin. Maya herself. The girl whose face had haunted him since the night of the summit. The girl who looked at the world with a mind sharper than most and eyes that were half his. She had reached out. The words were cautious and fragile, but they were open. She wanted to talk. He didn't know what to text back. For a man who had built empires with his words, who could sway boardrooms and investors with a single sentence, Ethan found himself paralyzed. There were no instructions for this. There was no formula. There was no script. He replied simply, "I would be honored to speak with you. Whenever and however you feel ready." 3 days passed before she replied again. He didn't press her. He spent the time walking through long repressed memories, forcing himself to sit with the shame. The image of Sarah, alone in a snow-covered hospital. The sound of a child's laughter he had never heard. The lost birthdays, the school projects, the scraped knees, the college applications. All the moments he could never reclaim. But he didn't let the guilt shatter him. He let it teach him. He now understood that redemption wasn't one act. It was 1,000 silent offerings presented patiently over time. Maya finally suggested they meet in a park near the university campus she had recently committed to. It was early spring, the kind of day where the trees were beginning to awaken and the air carried the first hints of something new. Ethan arrived 15 minutes early. He wore no suit, no watch, no expensive coat. Just a simple sweater and jeans, as if trying to shed the man he had been and become the man he was trying to be. When she arrived, he saw her before she saw him. She looked like herself, focused, thoughtful, slightly guarded. Her shoulders were straight, her walk steady. Her face unreadable. He sat on the bench across from her and laced his hands in his lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I really don't know how to do this," she finally admitted. "Neither do I," he replied softly. "But I'm here." She looked up at him. Her gaze was steady. "Why didn't you come back? Even after you walked away, even if the letter was convincing, why didn't you investigate? Why didn't you try?" It was the question that had been burning inside her since the moment she learned the truth. And it deserved an answer. Ethan didn't evade it. He didn't blame his mother or the chaos of his career. He made no excuses. Instead, he looked down at his hands and said, "I was afraid, and I was selfish. I let a letter dictate everything because it gave me an excuse not to face the possibility of being a father before I was ready. I told myself it was best for you, for your mother, for my career. But the truth is I was weak. I was young and arrogant, and I thought I could outrun the guilt. But it followed me anyway." Maya didn't speak for a long moment. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes glistened faintly in the soft morning light. The wind whispered in the branches above them. "I don't want a perfect explanation," she finally said. "I just want honesty. That is all I can offer you now," he said. "And time. Whatever it takes. I know I can't show up 18 years later and expect anything. I just want you to know that now I see you completely, and I am proud of who you are, whether you ever call me father or not." She looked away, blinking rapidly. For the first time, something in her loosened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something softer than resentment, a space where understanding could grow. They talked for over an hour. He asked questions, not about school or achievements, but about her. What books did she love? What kind of music did she listen to? What made her laugh? And he told her stories, not about money or power, but about the dreams he used to have and the mistakes that shaped him. For the first time, she saw the cracks in his armor, and she realized that the man sitting across from her wasn't just a figure from her imagination. He was real, imperfect, trying. At the end of the conversation, she stood up and said, "I'm not ready for anything yet, but I think I'd like to keep talking." He nodded. "Whenever you want." "I'll be here." She walked away slowly. The distance between them was still vast, but no longer infinite. Ethan remained on the bench long after she was gone, the wind blowing through the trees. Later that night, Maya returned home and found her mother waiting in the kitchen. Sarah looked up, searching her daughter's face for a sign. Maya didn't say anything immediately. She simply walked over, wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, and hugged her. "He didn't run this time," she said in a low voice. Sarah listened, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe healing was possible. Not because the past had changed, but because the future could. What do you think marked the turning point for Ethan? What was Maya's role in her own redemption? Give us your thoughts. Part 8. The truth crowns her. The meaningful ending. The months that followed were not smooth or easy, but they were honest. Maya and Ethan began to meet regularly, sometimes in public places, sometimes in quiet corners of the city, where they could talk without the weight of eyes or expectations. Their conversations were awkward at first, full of pauses and uncertainty, but beneath the hesitation was something firm, a desire to know. To understand, to build. Ethan never pushed her. He never asked her to call him Dad. He brought no gifts or promises. He simply showed up, time and time again, and listened. Slowly, brick by brick, a bridge began to form. He learned about her childhood, not just the achievements, but the quiet moments. The days she and Sarah spent sewing in a cold apartment. The nights they read books together under a single flickering lamp. She told him about the teachers who had believed in her, the science projects that had sparked her curiosity, and the hunger she had felt, not just for food, which was sometimes scarce, but for opportunity, for security, for space to dream. Ethan sat with every story like a confession, absorbing every word, grieving the memories he had missed, but honoring them all the same. Sarah remained cautious. She didn't interfere, but she didn't engage either. She watched from a distance as Maya forged this new connection, always ready to catch her if she fell. There were days the past rose like a tide inside her, reminding her of the pain, the loneliness, the nights she had cried silently while her daughter slept beside her. But then she would see them, Maya and Ethan sitting in the park or walking side by side down a quiet street, and something in her softened. Not forgiveness, not entirely, but recognition. People could change, and perhaps some wounds were not meant to be erased, but to be understood. It all changed the night of the National Future Science Awards ceremony. The event was held in a grand hall in New York, a space built for senators and academics, not high school students. Yet, tonight, it was filled with the country's brightest young minds, each alight with possibility. Maya had been named one of 3 finalists for her groundbreaking research in sustainable water filtration, and her name had been whispered in scientific circles for weeks. Journalists, investors, and university leaders filled the seats, their attention fixed on the stage. Maya stood backstage, her nerves humming. She wore a simple cream-colored dress sewn by Sarah herself, and a small, molecule-shaped brooch at her neck. When her name was announced and the crowd rose in applause, she walked toward the light with a calm she never knew she possessed. She spoke without notes. "I am here today not as someone who emerged from perfect circumstances," she began, "but as someone who emerged because she was allowed to. Because my mother, a woman who worked 3 jobs and never lost hope, believed in me when no one else did. Because the teachers, the mentors, and yes, even the silent strangers, opened doors I could never have opened alone." She paused. Her eyes moved across the crowd, settling for a brief moment on 2 faces in the front row. Sarah, wide-eyed with emotion, and Ethan, hands clasped, looking at her not as a benefactor or a symbol of redemption, but simply and completely as a father. "I used to believe that pain was something you carried alone," she continued. "That absence meant finality, that silence was the end of the story. But I have learned that sometimes absence is just a chapter, and silence is the space where the truth waits to be told." The room was silent. There were no coughs, no shifting in seats, just breath, held in 1,000 chests. "So today, I accept this award not just for myself," she said, her voice firm, "but for every girl whose future was doubted, for every mother who gave everything without expecting anything in return, and for every person who learned that it is never too late to show up." The applause was deafening. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. But Maya heard none of it. She walked off the stage and toward the front row. Sarah stood up first, wrapping her daughter in an embrace that spoke of 1,000 sleepless nights and 1,000 more moments of pride. And then, slowly, Maya turned to Ethan. He rose, unsure, not knowing if he was allowed this. But she took a step forward and opened her arms. He held her, carefully, reverently, as if he feared she might vanish. That night, everything changed again. The headlines were bright. Teen innovator captures nation's heart. Maya Hayes, the girl who designed a future. But to her, the moment that mattered most came hours later, in a quiet hotel room, where she sat between her mother and father, eating takeout from paper boxes and laughing at something that wasn't even funny. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. They were building something else now. In the months that followed, Maya began her freshman year at MIT. Sarah opened a foundation for young single mothers, offering legal help, housing support, and fashion design scholarships. Ethan established the Maya Hayes Innovation Fund for underprivileged youth in science and technology. The three were not a traditional family, but they were a family all the same, built not on perfection, but on truth, effort, and the choice to keep trying. Some wounds never disappear, but sometimes they become the place where the light gets in. Redemption is a long and painful road. Unlike a fairy tale ending, this story does not erase the pain of the past, but it honors it. Ethan's reunion with his daughter is not magic, but the result of his silent effort and her courage to face the truth. What makes this ending so impactful is that it is not about getting forgiveness, but about showing transformation and earning the right to presence. This story reminds us that despite mistakes, there is always an opportunity for change. The love of an unbroken mother, the brilliance of a daughter who refuses to be defined by her absence, and the humility of a man who finally learns the true meaning of success. What do you think of this ending? Do you believe redemption is possible in situations like this? Should Sarah forgive Ethan? Leave your opinion in the comments. Would you like me to tell you another story of redemption? Or do you prefer a mystery or adventure story?